February 14th, 1965. Wells Restaurant, Harlem, 2:30 a.m. Malcolm X sat alone in a back booth exhausted. His house had been bombed a week earlier. Death threats came daily. He knew he had weeks, maybe days to live. Then Bumpy Johnson walked in and sat across from him. Nobody had arranged this meeting, but both men knew why they were there. "You're going to die, Malcolm," Bumpy said without preamble. "Yes," Malcolm replied, "probably soon." "I can still stop it," Bumpy said. "Say the word, and I'll make it clear to everyone in Harlem. You're under my protection. Nobody touches you." Malcolm smiled sadly. "We've had this conversation before, Bumpy. You know my answer." "Then why am I here?" Bumpy asked. "I don't know," Malcolm said. "Why are you here?" Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because when you die, there won't be anyone left who remembers what Harlem used to be. Before the drugs got bad. Before the violence got worse. Before we all forgot why we were fighting." 7 days later, Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom. 3 years and 5 months later, Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack. In the same restaurant. In the same booth where he'd said goodbye to Malcolm. This is the story of the secret meeting between Harlem's most famous revolutionary and Harlem's most powerful gangster. A meeting that revealed they had more in common than anyone knew. Subscribe now because this story will change everything you thought you knew about Malcolm X's final week. To understand why Malcolm X and Bumpy Johnson met that night, you need to understand their shared history. Both men arrived in Harlem as teenagers fleeing violence. Bumpy Johnson, 1919, sent from Charleston, South Carolina, at age 14 after his brother was accused of killing a white man. His parents feared a lynch mob would come for their entire family. Malcolm Little, 1941, sent from Lansing, Michigan at age 15 after his father was murdered by white supremacists and his mother was institutionalized. Both men found Harlem to be simultaneously a refuge and a battlefield. Bumpy's path became an enforcer for numbers queen Stephanie St. Clair, fought a war with Dutch Schultz for control of Harlem's illegal gambling, eventually became the most powerful black gangster in New York, controlling drugs, numbers, and protection rackets. Malcolm's path became a hustler known as Detroit Red, sold drugs, ran numbers, committed burglaries, went to prison in 1946, transformed into Malcolm X, minister of the Nation of Islam, became the voice of black nationalism. On the surface, they were opposites. Bumpy, criminal entrepreneur pragmatist, working within the system, but they shared something deeper. Both were fighting for black survival in a white-controlled world. Bumpy through economic power in the underworld. Malcolm through political power in the streets. And both men knew that their methods, while different, served the same community. Bumpy respected Malcolm. Mamie Johnson, Bumpy's widow, he didn't agree with everything Malcolm said, especially the stuff about drugs. But he respected that Malcolm was trying to lift our people up. And Malcolm, I think, understood that Bumpy was doing what he had to do to survive and to help others survive. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, their paths occasionally crossed. Malcolm preached at Temple No. 7 on 1116th Street. Bumpy operated out of various Harlem establishments. Both men drank coffee at Wells Restaurant on Lenox Avenue. Both men knew the same hustlers, numbers runners, and street soldiers. They weren't friends, but they weren't enemies either. They were two powerful men occupying different spheres of the same territory, maintaining a respectful distance. But in 1964, everything changed. Malcolm left the Nation of Islam after discovering Elijah Muhammad's corruption. The nation immediately marked him for death. And suddenly, Malcolm needed something he'd never needed before: street-level protection in Harlem. The kind of protection only one man could provide: Bumpy Johnson. But Malcolm's pride wouldn't let him ask. And Bumpy's principles wouldn't let him offer unless Malcolm met his conditions. For 6 months they circled each other. Two stubborn men, both knowing Malcolm was running out of time. Roller-ups, March 8, 1964. Malcolm X publicly announced his break with the Nation of Islam. Within 24 hours, death threats began pouring in. The Nation of Islam's newspaper, Muhammad Speaks, published articles calling Malcolm a traitor. Louis Farrakhan wrote, "Such a man as Malcolm is worthy of death." Malcolm knew he was a marked man, but he also knew something most people didn't. The Nation of Islam didn't have sophisticated assassination capabilities. They were ministers and street preachers, not trained killers. If they wanted Malcolm dead, they would need to hire it out. And in Harlem, all serious violence went through one gatekeeper, Bumpy Johnson. Not because Bumpy controlled everything directly, but because he controlled information. Nobody moved weapons. Nobody hired muscle. Nobody planned a hit in Harlem without Bumpy knowing about it. In April 1964, according to Bumpy Johnson's later accounts, Bumpy received a visit from two Nation of Islam officials. They wanted to know, would Bumpy facilitate Malcolm's assassination? Bumpy's answer was clear. No, Malcolm's off limits. Anyone who touches him answers to me. The NOI officials left angry, but they respected the boundary. For the moment, throughout 1964, Malcolm traveled extensively. To Africa, to the Middle East, to Europe. When he was in Harlem, he moved cautiously, varied his routes, stayed vigilant. But by December 1964, the pressure was building. December 20, 1964, Malcolm's car was run off the road. No injuries, but a clear warning. January 15, 1965, Malcolm received a phone call at 3 a.m. A voice said, "You have 2 weeks," then hung up. February 4, 1965, Malcolm returned home to find his door had been forced open. Nothing was stolen, but someone had been inside. February 14, 1965, Malcolm's house was firebombed at 2:45 a.m. Malcolm, his wife Betty, and their 4 daughters barely escaped. The house was destroyed. That was the breaking point. After the firebombing, Malcolm's advisors begged him to leave New York. Go to Chicago, go to Detroit, go anywhere but Harlem, they said. But Malcolm refused. I won't be run out of my own community. That night, February 14th, Malcolm couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., he left his temporary hotel and walked the streets of Harlem. He ended up at Wells' restaurant and found Bumpy Johnson sitting in his regular booth as if he'd been waiting. Wells' restaurant was one of Harlem's late-night institutions, open 24 hours, known for its chicken and grits, frequented by hustlers, musicians, insomniacs, and anyone who needed a quiet place to think at 3 a.m. Bumpy Johnson had a regular booth back corner facing the door. He could see everyone who came in. Nobody could approach without him knowing. When Malcolm walked into Wells at 2:30 a.m. on February 14, 1965, Bumpy was already there, coffee in front of him, newspaper folded beside him. Malcolm hesitated at the door. He hadn't expected to see Bumpy, but something made him walk over. "Mind if I sit?" Malcolm asked. Bumpy gestured to the opposite seat. "It's a free country, supposedly." Malcolm sat down. They didn't speak for a moment. Margaret Williams, the night waitress, brought Malcolm coffee without being asked. Years later, she would remember this night vividly. They both looked exhausted, she recalled in a 1999 interview. Malcolm had burns on his hands from the fire earlier that night. Bumpy looked older than usual, like he'd aged 5 years in a month. I could feel the weight in that booth, like they were carrying something nobody else could see. Finally, Bumpy broke the silence. "Your house burned down tonight." "Yes," Malcolm said. "You and your family get out okay?" "Yes, barely." Bumpy nodded. "That's good. Kids shouldn't have to live through that." Another silence. Then Bumpy said what they both knew he'd say. "You're going to die, Malcolm. You know that, right?" Malcolm didn't flinch. "Yes, probably soon." "I can still stop it," Bumpy said. "Say the word and I'll make it clear to everyone in Harlem. You're under my protection. Nobody touches you. Not the nation, not anybody." This was the same offer Bumpy had made informally for months. And Malcolm's answer was the same. "We've had this conversation before, Bumpy. You know my answer." Bumpy's jaw tightened. "Then why are we here?" "I don't know," Malcolm said honestly. "Why are you here?" Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something Malcolm had never heard from him before: sadness. "Because when you die, there won't be anyone left who remembers what Harlem used to be." Malcolm leaned forward. "What do you mean?" And Bumpy began to tell a story that would reveal why these two men, revolutionary and gangster, were more alike than anyone knew. Bumpy lit a cigarette and stared at the table. "I came to Harlem in 1919, he said. "I was 14 years old. My brother Willie had been accused of killing a white man in South Carolina. Didn't matter if it was true or not. They were going to lynch him. Lynch all of us, probably. So my parents scraped together everything they had and sent us north. When I got to Harlem, Malcolm, it was like nothing I'd ever seen. Black people owned businesses. Black people walked with their heads up. We had the Cotton Club, the Apollo, the Savoy. We had writers, musicians, artists. We had pride." "I know the history," Malcolm said quietly. "No," Bumpy said sharply. "You know the dates and the names. You don't know what it felt like to be a black kid from the South and see black people living like they were somebody. Not servants, not sharecroppers, somebody." Bumpy took a drag from his cigarette. "That's the Harlem I fell in love with. That's the Harlem I decided to protect by selling drugs," Malcolm asked. There was no judgment in his voice, just genuine curiosity. "By making sure we had power," Bumpy replied. "The white mob, the Italians, the Irish, they wanted to control Harlem. Control the numbers, control the clubs, control everything. Take money out of black pockets and put it in white pockets. I made a deal with them. A compromise. They get a cut, but we run the streets. Black money stays in black hands, mostly. Black enforcers get paid. Black families get protected. That's not power, Malcolm said. That's collaboration. Call it what you want, Bumpy said. But it kept the white mob from owning Harlem completely, and it put food on a lot of black tables. At the cost of poisoning our community with heroin, Malcolm replied. Bumpy's eyes flashed. You think I'm proud of the drugs? You think I don't see what they're doing? I've watched Harlem rot from the inside, Malcolm. I've watched kids who should have been doctors become addicts. I've watched families destroyed. Then stop, Malcolm said simply. Can't, Bumpy said. The moment I step away, someone worse takes over. At least with me, there are rules. No selling to kids. No cutting the product so bad it kills people immediately. No destroying the community completely. Those rules make you feel better? Malcolm asked. No, Bumpy said honestly. They keep me alive, and they keep Harlem from being even worse. They sat in silence, two men who had spent their lives fighting for the same community in opposite ways. Then Bumpy said something that made Malcolm understand why they were really there. You and me, Malcolm, we're the last ones who remember why we started fighting. Everyone else is just fighting. They forgot the why. Malcolm felt something shift. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a eulogy. For Harlem, for themselves, for a dream that had died somewhere along the way. Malcolm looked at Bumpy across the table. You want to know why I can't accept your protection? I know why, Bumpy said. Pride. No, Malcolm said. Principle. Same thing, Bumpy replied. Not to me, Malcolm said. Let me tell you a story. Malcolm leaned back. When I was in prison, Charlestown, 1946, I was nobody, just another black convict. Angry at the world, angry at white people, angry at myself. Then my brother visited me and told me about Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. He said the white man is the devil, but if you follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you can be free. For the first time in my life, Bumpy, I believed in something bigger than survival. I believed in liberation, in dignity, in purpose. I know the story, Bumpy said. Everyone knows the story. You became Malcolm X. No, Malcolm said. Listen to what I'm actually saying. I believed in something, not someone, something. An idea that black people could be free, not just safe, not just surviving, free. Malcolm's voice grew stronger. When I got out of prison in 1952, I dedicated my life to that idea. I built temples. I recruited thousands. I preached that we didn't need white approval, white institutions, white anything. Then I discovered the truth about Elijah Muhammad, the money he stole, the women he abused, the lies he told, and I realized the organization was corrupt. But the idea of black self-determination, black dignity, black freedom, that was still true. So I left the nation, and everyone said Malcolm's finished. He has no protection, no money, no organization, and they were right. I have none of those things. But I still have the idea. And if I accept your protection, Bumpy, I'm saying the idea isn't enough. I need a gangster to keep me alive. I'm saying survival is more important than principle. Bumpy shook his head. Malcolm, dead men don't have principles. They just have graves. Maybe, Malcolm said. But if I live by compromising what I believe, then I'm already dead. I'm just walking around pretending. Bumpy stubbed out his cigarette. You know what the difference between you and me is, Malcolm? You believe in ideas. I believe in people. Ideas get you killed. People keep you alive. Malcolm smiled sadly. And that's why we're both doomed, Bumpy. You can't save people by destroying them with drugs. And I can't free people by dying before I finish the work. They both knew he was right. This was a goodbye disguised as a debate. Restaurant was nearly empty now. Just Malcolm, Bumpy, and Margaret the waitress wiping down tables in the background. Tell me something, Bumpy, Malcolm said. When you die, whenever that is, what do you want people to remember? Bumpy looked surprised by the question. Nobody's going to remember me, Malcolm. I'm a gangster. We don't get remembered. We get forgotten. That's not true, Malcolm said. People will remember you. The question is, what will they remember? Bumpy thought about it. I want them to remember that I kept Harlem black. That when the white mob tried to take over completely, I stopped them. That I gave work to black men when nobody else would. That I protected the community, even if my methods were ugly. That's worth remembering, Malcolm said. What about you? Bumpy asked. What do you want people to remember? That I told the truth, Malcolm said without hesitation. Even when the truth was ugly. Even when it cost me everything. Even when I had to admit I was wrong and change. Truth gets you killed, Bumpy said. Lies keep you alive, Malcolm replied. But they kill your soul. They looked at each other. Two men who had taken completely different paths but somehow ended up at the same destination, knowing they were both dying for Harlem in their own ways. Malcolm, Bumpy said, I have a confession. What? I respect you more than anyone I've ever met, and I think you're an idiot. Malcolm laughed. A genuine, surprised laugh. I respect you too, Bumpy, and I think you're breaking your own heart trying to save a community through the same poison that's killing it. So we're both idiots, Bumpy said. Two idiots who love Harlem, Malcolm agreed. At 3:15 a.m., Malcolm stood to leave. Bumpy, he said, when I'm gone, and I will be gone soon, keep fighting. In your way, it's not my way. But it's something. Don't let Harlem forget who it was supposed to be. Bumpy stood and extended his hand. Malcolm shook it. And Malcolm, Bumpy said, when they write your story, make sure they write that you never compromised, even when you should have. That's worth something. It's worth everything, Malcolm said. He turned and walked out of Wells' restaurant at 3:17 a.m. on February 14, 1965. Bumpy sat back down in his booth and ordered another coffee. 7 days later, on February 24, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom, shot 21 times by Nation of Islam members. He was 39 years old. When Bumpy heard the news, he went to Wells' restaurant and sat in the same booth. He didn't say a word for 3 hours, just sat there drinking coffee. Margaret, the waitress, later said, Bumpy looked like someone had killed his brother. Not his friend, his brother. The only person who understood him. But what nobody knew that day, Bumpy's own countdown had started. July 7, 1968, 1:45 a.m., Wells Restaurant, Harlem. Bumpy Johnson sat in his regular booth, the same booth where he'd said goodbye to Malcolm 3 years and 5 months earlier. He ordered his usual coffee, chicken leg, hominy grits. May, his wife, had begged him not to go out that night. You haven't been feeling well, she said. Stay home. Can't sleep, Bumpy replied. Need to think. At Wells, Margaret, the waitress, brought his food. You okay, Mr. Johnson? You look tired. I'm always tired, Margaret, Bumpy said with a small smile. At 1:47 a.m., as Margaret walked away, Bumpy suddenly clutched his chest. His coffee cup tipped over. His breathing became labored. Margaret rushed over. Mr. Johnson, Bumpy tried to speak but couldn't. He slumped forward. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They tried to save him, but Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was pronounced dead at Harlem Hospital at 2:33 a.m. Cause of death, massive heart attack. He was 62 years old. When police investigated the scene, they found something strange. The booth where Bumpy died was the same booth where Malcolm X had sat on February 14, 1965. Coincidence, the police report said, but Margaret Williams, the waitress, didn't think so. In 1999, 31 years after Bumpy's death, Margaret Williams gave an interview to a Harlem History Project. She was 76 years old and knew she didn't have much time left. She wanted to tell the truth about that night in February 1965. They weren't just two men having coffee, Margaret said. They were saying goodbye to each other, to Harlem, to the dream they'd both fought for in different ways. Malcolm knew he was going to die, and I think Bumpy knew he'd follow eventually. When Bumpy died in that same booth 3 years later, I wasn't surprised. He'd been dying since the night Malcolm walked out. He just took a while to finish. Day. Wells Restaurant no longer exists. It closed in 1972, 4 years after Bumpy's death. The building was torn down in 1985. But the story of that final meeting, February 14, 1965, 2:30 a.m., has become a legend in Harlem. Some historians doubt it happened. There's no evidence, they say. No witnesses except a waitress who told the story 34 years later. But those who knew Malcolm and Bumpy believe it. It sounds exactly like something both of them would do, said Dr. James Turner, who knew Malcolm in his final years. Malcolm didn't have many people he could talk to honestly at that point. Bumpy was someone who understood power, violence, survival, all the things Malcolm was dealing with. It makes sense they'd talk. May Johnson, Bumpy's widow, confirmed parts of the story before her death in 2009. Bumpy came home around 4 a.m. that morning, she said in a 2006 interview. I asked him where he'd been. He said saying goodbye. I asked to who. He said to a man who's about to become a martyr, and to the Harlem we used to know. I didn't understand then, but I do now. What we know for certain, Malcolm X's house was firebombed on February 14, 1965. Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21, 1965. Bumpy Johnson died at Wells Restaurant on July 7, 1968. Both men dedicated their lives to Harlem. Both men died for it, in different ways. What we can infer, two men who represented opposite approaches to black survival. Both respected each other despite fundamental disagreements. Both knew they were fighting losing battles. Both refused to compromise their core principles, even though compromise might have saved them. The meeting at Wells Restaurant, if it happened exactly as described, was the moment two legends acknowledged they were both ghosts already. They were just waiting for their bodies to catch up. Malcolm's body caught up 7 days later. Bumpy's caught up 3 years and 5 months later. In the same booth. Maybe that's not coincidence. Maybe that's mock coincidence. Maybe that's poetry. Malcolm X chose principle over survival and died at 39. Bumpy Johnson chose pragmatic survival and died at 62, his heart broken by the community he tried to save through methods that poisoned it. Two different paths, same destination, both dead, both remembered. If you had to choose between Malcolm's idealism and Bumpy's pragmatism, which would you choose? Or is the real tragedy that those were the only choices available to black men trying to survive in 1960s America? Share your thoughts in the comments.